I never thought my front walkway would become a battleground, but that's exactly what happened when Sharon Pemberton decided she had enough power to control when I could shovel snow. My name is Aaron Kirkland, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Rochester, Minnesota, for 3 years before the nightmare started. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked almost identical, painted in approved shades of beige, gray, or pale blue. When my wife and I first bought the place, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. They kept the common areas maintained, made sure nobody painted their house neon pink, and generally stayed out of everyone's business. Then Sharon took over as HOA president. Sharon was one of those women who had never worked outside the home and treated her position on the homeowners association like she was running a Fortune 500 company. She was 52 years old with a severe blonde bob that looked like she cut it with a ruler, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck like some kind of weapon. Her husband, Greg, was a quiet accountant who had perfected the art of nodding silently while she talked, which she did constantly. The problem started in October when Sharon called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss what she called neighborhood standards degradation. I attended because the email made it sound like something serious was happening, maybe vandalism or a rash of break-ins. Instead, I sat in the community center for 2 hours while Sharon presented a PowerPoint about how some residents were letting their grass get half an inch too long before mowing. I should have seen the warning signs then. The real trouble began in January when Minnesota got hit with one of those brutal cold snaps that makes you question why humans ever decided to settle this far north. We had 3 major snowstorms in 2 weeks, each dumping 8 to 12 inches of heavy, wet snow. I have a corner lot, which means I have more sidewalk to clear than most of my neighbors. The city of Rochester has an ordinance requiring residents to clear their sidewalks within 24 hours of a snowfall ending, and I always complied. I would get up early, usually around 6 in the morning, fire up my snowblower, and clear my driveway and the sidewalks along both streets. I was out there on a Tuesday morning, the sun not even up yet, working on the heavy snow from the previous night's storm. The snowblower was loud, sure, but it was January in Minnesota. Everyone understood that snow removal meant early mornings and noisy equipment. At least, I thought everyone understood that. I had just finished the sidewalk along Maple Drive when I saw Sharon marching across the street toward me. She was wearing a puffy purple coat that made her look like an angry grape, and her face was already red before she even reached me. I killed the engine on the snowblower. "Good morning, Sharon," I said, trying to be neighborly despite the early hour. "There is nothing good about being woken up at 6 in the morning by that monstrosity," she said, pointing at my snowblower like it was a weapon of mass destruction. "I'm just clearing my walk before I head to work," I explained. "City ordinance says we have to clear within 24 hours. I don't care about city ordinances. The HOA has rules too, and you're disturbing the peace." I felt my jaw tighten. "Sharon, it's a snowblower. In January. In Minnesota, this is what people do." "Not before 8 a.m. they don't," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm going to bring this up at the next board meeting. This is unacceptable." She turned and walked back to her house, which was 3 doors down from mine. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, my breath fogging in the frigid air, wondering if she was serious. Sharon had a reputation for being difficult, but this seemed extreme even for her. 2 weeks later, I received an official letter from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. It was printed on fancy letterhead and delivered via certified mail, which should have been my first clue that Sharon had lost her mind. The letter informed me that the HOA board had voted to implement a new rule. No outdoor maintenance activities, including but not limited to lawn mowing, leaf blowing, and snow removal, could take place before 8 a.m. or after 8 p.m. on weekdays, or before 9 a.m. on weekends. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. This was Minnesota. In January, snow removal before 8 a.m. wasn't just common, it was necessary. People had jobs to get to. Kids had school. You couldn't just leave your driveway and sidewalks buried in snow until 8 o'clock in the morning. I called my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 houses down. Marcus was a doctor at Mayo Clinic and had been on the HOA board before Sharon took over. "Did you see this letter?" I asked him. "Yeah, I got mine this morning," Marcus said. He sounded tired. "I already tried talking to Sharon about it. She's convinced that quality of life issues are more important than practical concerns. But what about the city ordinance? What about people who need to get to work?" I brought that up. She said we could wake up earlier and shovel by hand quietly, or we could wait until 8 and risk being late. She honestly doesn't care, Aaron. She's on some kind of power trip. Can she even do this? Can the HOA override city ordinances? Marcus sighed. Technically, no. The city ordinance takes precedence, but the HOA can fine you for violating their rules, and they can make your life miserable. I've seen her put liens on people's houses for unpaid fines. It's a nightmare. I hung up and looked at the letter again. The fine for a first violation was $100. Second violation was $250. Third violation was $500. Plus the HOA could take legal action to force compliance. My wife, Jennifer, came into the kitchen and saw the letter in my hands. "What's wrong?" I handed her the letter. She read it, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to anger in the span of 30 seconds. "This is insane," she said. "You have to be at work by 7:30. You can't just leave the driveway covered in snow." "I know." "And what about the sidewalk?" "We could get fined by the city if we don't clear it." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? I could ignore the HOA rule and keep clearing my snow in the morning, racking up fines and eventually facing legal action. I could try to fight it through proper channels, attending HOA meetings and arguing my case, which would probably go nowhere because Sharon controlled the board. Or I could comply with the stupid rule and deal with the consequences. I chose option 3, but not in the way Jennifer expected. "I'm going to follow their rule exactly," I said. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not going to do any snow removal before 8 a.m., none at all." Jennifer looked at me like I had suggested setting the house on fire. "Aaron, that's not practical. Your driveway will be impassable. The sidewalk will be a hazard. The city ordinance says I have 24 hours to clear the sidewalk after a snowfall ends. It doesn't specify when during those 24 hours, so I'll clear it, just not until after 8 a.m. But you have to be at work." "I'll park on the street the night before if snow is forecast. I'll walk through the snow to get to my car. It'll be inconvenient, but I won't be violating any rules." Jennifer studied my face. "This is about more than just the snow, isn't it?" She was right. It was about Sharon thinking she could control every aspect of our lives. It was about the principle of the thing. I had spent 3 years being a model homeowner, following every reasonable rule, paying my dues on time, and serving on the volunteer beautification committee. And this was how Sharon chose to exercise her authority, by making it nearly impossible for people to maintain their properties properly. "I'm just going to follow the rules," I said again. The next snowfall came 4 days later. The forecast called for 6 to 8 inches overnight, starting around 9 p.m. and ending by 5 a.m. True to my word, I parked my truck on the street that evening. When I woke up the next morning at 6, I looked out the window at my buried driveway and sidewalk. The snowblower sat in the garage, easily accessible, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I put on my winter gear, trudged through the snow to my truck and brushed it off. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that makes your back ache after 5 minutes of shoveling. I cleared enough room around my truck to get it out of its parking spot and drove to work, arriving 15 minutes late because the roads were still being plowed. At 8:15, my phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Sharon just knocked on the door," she said. "She wants to know why you haven't cleared the sidewalk yet. Tell her I'm following the HOA rules. No snow removal before 8 a.m. Aaron, it's past 8 now. I'm at work. I'll clear it when I get home this evening. I have 24 hours from when the snow stopped, which was 5 a.m. That gives me until 5 a.m. tomorrow morning." I could hear Jennifer talking to someone in the background, then Sharon's voice, shrill and insistent. Jennifer came back on the line. "She says the sidewalk is a safety hazard and you need to clear it immediately. Tell her I'll clear it at my earliest convenience, which will be when I get home from work around 5:30 p.m. More muffled conversation, then Jennifer said, "She's leaving, but she looks really angry. Let her be angry." I knew I was being petty, but something about Sharon's authoritarian approach had triggered every stubborn bone in my body. If she wanted to make arbitrary rules, I would follow them to the letter, even if it made things harder for everyone. The real problem revealed itself 3 days later. I was eating breakfast when I heard shouting outside. I looked out the front window and saw a scene I hadn't anticipated. The school bus was stopped at the corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street, right where it always stopped to pick up the neighborhood kids, but it wasn't moving. The driver was standing outside the bus, looking at something on the ground. I grabbed my coat and walked outside. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees overnight, and the snow I had cleared the evening before, 3 hours after getting home from work, had partially melted during the slightly warmer afternoon, then refrozen into a sheet of ice. The sidewalk was a skating rink. The bus driver, a middle-aged woman named Dorothy who had been driving this route for years, saw me approaching. "Aaron, I can't let the kids off here," she said. "Look at this ice. Someone's going to break their neck." She was right. The sidewalk was treacherous. Because I hadn't cleared the snow early in the morning when it was still fresh and powdery, then came back to clear it after being at work all day, the sun had partially melted the snow. The melting snow had run across the sidewalk and refrozen into thick, irregular ice. "I cleared the snow yesterday," I said, which was true but unhelpful. "I don't care when you cleared it. This is dangerous. I'm going to have to take the kids to the next stop." I saw Sharon's front door open. She came power walking across the street, still in her bathrobe and slippers. 3 other parents had also emerged from their houses, including Marcus and a woman named Patricia Donovan who had 2 elementary school-aged kids. "What's going on?" Sharon demanded. "Why isn't the bus moving?" Dorothy explained the situation. Sharon's face went through several shades of red before she pointed at me. "This is your fault," she said. "You didn't clear your sidewalk properly." "I cleared it within the 24-hour window required by city ordinance," I said calmly. "And I followed the HOA rule about not doing snow removal before 8 a.m. You cleared it at almost 9 p.m. The snow had been sitting all day, because I was at work, where I have to be at 7:30 in the morning. Which is before 8 a.m. when your rule says I'm allowed to use my snowblower." Patricia stepped forward. "Wait, you couldn't clear the snow in the morning because of the HOA rule. That's correct. But that's insane. Everyone clears their snow in the morning." Sharon rounded on Patricia. The rule is in place to protect the quality of life in this neighborhood. People shouldn't be woken up by loud machinery at inappropriate hours. My kids can't get to school, Patricia said, her voice rising. How is that protecting quality of life? Dorothy held up her hands. Ladies, gentlemen, I don't care about HOA politics. I care about safety. I'm moving the bus to the next stop. If you want your kids to catch this bus, you need to drive them down there. She climbed back into the bus and pulled away, leaving a group of increasingly angry parents standing on the icy sidewalk. Marcus looked at the ice, then at me, then at Sharon. "This is going to keep happening," he said quietly. "Every time it snows, this same problem is going to occur." "Aaron can't clear his snow early because of your rule, Sharon. And when he clears it later, it doesn't work as well. This is a corner lot. The bus stops here. We need to fix this." "The rule stays," Sharon said firmly. "Aaron just needs to do a better job of clearing his sidewalk." "How?" I asked. "Tell me specifically how I'm supposed to do a better job while still following your rule." Sharon sputtered for a moment. "You could get up earlier and shovel by hand, quietly." "I could," I agreed, "but I don't have to. The city ordinance gives me 24 hours. Your rule says no power equipment before 8 a.m. I'm following both rules. If you don't like the results, maybe the rule needs to change." I turned and walked back to my house, leaving Sharon fuming on the icy sidewalk. The situation escalated over the next 2 weeks. Minnesota got hit with snow 3 more times, and each time I followed the same pattern. I parked on the street, went to work, came home late, and cleared the snow in the evening. Each time, the partial melting and refreezing created hazardous ice conditions. Each time, the school bus couldn't safely stop at the corner. The neighborhood parents were furious, but their anger was divided. Some blamed me for being petty and not just clearing the snow properly. Others blamed Sharon for implementing a stupid rule in the first place. The neighborhood Facebook group became a war zone of competing posts and increasingly hostile comments. Sharon tried to fine me for creating a public hazard, but I appealed the fine with a detailed explanation of how I was following both city ordinances and HOA rules. The management company that handled HOA legal issues sent her a terse email explaining that I was technically in compliance with all relevant rules, and that fining me would open the HOA to a lawsuit. That's when Sharon made her biggest mistake. She hired someone to clear my sidewalk. I came home from work on a Thursday evening after another snowfall to find my sidewalk already clear. Not just clear, but professionally done, with ice melt spread liberally across the entire surface. A bill was tucked into my front door. It was from Winter Warrior Snow Removal Services and charged $250 to the HOA for emergency sidewalk clearing. I took a picture of the bill and my cleared sidewalk. Then I called Marcus. "Did Sharon have someone clear my sidewalk without my permission?" "Apparently. She told the board this morning that she was taking executive action to resolve the bus stop safety issue." "Can she do that?" "I don't think so. It's your property. She can't just hire contractors to work on your property without permission." "What about the bill?" "She's planning to assess it against your account." I felt anger surge through me. "So she's going to charge me $250 for something I didn't authorize and didn't want. That's her plan." I spent that evening researching Minnesota property law and HOA regulations. What I found was interesting. Sharon, as HOA president, had the authority to deal with emergencies that affected common areas or posed immediate dangers to residents. But my sidewalk wasn't a common area. It was part of my private property. And while the ice was certainly inconvenient, it didn't rise to the level of an emergency that would justify the HOA taking action on private property, without owner consent. The next morning, I sent a certified letter to the HOA board, copied to the management company, formally objecting to the unauthorized work on my property and refusing to pay the assessed charge. I also filed a complaint with the management company about Sharon's conduct. Sharon's response was to send me another violation notice, this time for failure to maintain property in a safe condition. The fine was $500. I knew then that this was going to end up in court. My lawyer was a guy named Rick Thompson who specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. He was in his early 40s, bald as a cue ball, and had a smile that suggested he enjoyed fighting with homeowner associations. "This is straightforward," he said after reviewing all my documentation. "She's overstepped her authority multiple times. The unauthorized work on your property, the retaliatory fines, the impossible to comply with rules. We can take this to court and win. How long will it take? Depends on whether they want to settle or fight. Could be a few months, could be a year. And how much will it cost? I'll be honest with you, Aaron. HOA cases can get expensive. But in this case, I think we can get our legal fees covered as part of the judgment. The HOA has insurance for this kind of thing. We're not trying to bankrupt your neighbors. We're trying to fix a broken system." I thought about it for a day, then called Rick back and told him to proceed. The lawsuit hit Sharon like a freight train. I filed in Olmsted County District Court, seeking a declaratory judgment that the pre-8 a.m. snow removal ban was unenforceable, a court order requiring the HOA to stop assessing unauthorized charges against my account, and reimbursement of all legal fees. I also requested a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any further action against me while the case was pending. The judge granted the temporary restraining order within 48 hours. Sharon called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the lawsuit crisis. I didn't attend, but Marcus did, and he called me afterward. "It was ugly," he said. "Sharon spent an hour ranting about how you're trying to destroy the neighborhood, but then the HOA's lawyer showed up and basically told her she's screwed. He said the insurance company is refusing to cover her unauthorized actions, which means if you win, the judgment comes out of HOA funds, funds that are supposed to be used for maintenance and improvements." "What did the other board members say?" Tom Reynolds asked for her resignation. So did Barbara Mitchell, but Sharon refused. She said she's been elected to a position of leadership and she's not going to abandon her post because one resident is being difficult. "So what happens now?" "The lawyer recommended they settle with you and rescind the snow removal rule." Sharon refused. The board voted anyway. 4-1 they voted to offer you a settlement and revoke the rule. Sharon voted against it, obviously. But it doesn't matter. The board has the authority to overrule her. The lawyer is supposed to contact your attorney next week. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication, but the feeling didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a call from Jennifer while I was at work. She was crying. "Someone vandalized the house," she said. "They spray painted on the garage door." I left work immediately and drove home. When I pulled onto Maple Drive, I could see the damage from a block away. Someone had spray-painted "Neighborhood Destroyer" across my white garage door in bright red letters. They had also slashed 3 of my truck's tires, which I had parked in the driveway the night before since there was no snow in the forecast. I called the police. 2 Rochester PD officers showed up within 20 minutes. They took photos, got my statement, and examined the security camera footage from my doorbell camera. The vandalism had happened around 3 a.m., and the person had been wearing dark clothing and a ski mask. The camera angle wasn't good enough to identify them. "We'll file a report," one of the officers said, "and we'll increase patrols in the neighborhood. Do you have any idea who might have done this?" I explained the HOA situation. The officer nodded slowly. "We've had a few calls from this subdivision lately. Disputes between neighbors, that kind of thing. Are you afraid this person might come back?" "I don't know. Maybe. We can have a patrol car drive by regularly for the next few nights, and I'd recommend improving your security camera coverage. Get some cameras that cover your driveway and the street." After the police left, Marcus came over. He looked at the garage door and shook his head. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "I'm sorry, Aaron. It's not your fault. Some people in the neighborhood think you're being unreasonable. They think you should have just cleared your snow early and ignored the HOA rule. And get fined into oblivion. I know. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just telling you what people are saying. There's a petition going around to force you to sell your house." I stared at him. "A petition? To force me to sell? It's not legally binding or anything. It's just people being stupid. But Sharon's been telling everyone that you're trying to ruin property values and make the neighborhood unsafe for children." That night, Jennifer and I had a long conversation about whether we should just give up and move. The house had become a source of stress rather than a home. But the more we talked, the angrier we both got. We hadn't done anything wrong. We were being persecuted for following the rules and standing up to a petty tyrant. "We're not leaving," Jennifer finally said. "We're going to see this through." The settlement offer came a week later. The HOA agreed to rescind the snow removal time restrictions, remove all fines from my account, reimburse me for the unauthorized snow removal charges, and pay my legal fees up to that point. In exchange, I would agree to drop the lawsuit and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. Rick recommended I accept it. "You got everything you wanted. The bad rule is gone, you don't owe them any money, and they're paying your legal bills. Take the win." But I wasn't satisfied. "What about the vandalism?" "That's a separate police matter. The HOA isn't responsible for what some anonymous person did. But Sharon created the environment that led to it. She's been telling people I'm destroying the neighborhood." Rick leaned back in his chair. "I understand your frustration. But proving that Sharon is responsible for the vandalism would require evidence we don't have. And if you reject this settlement and continue the lawsuit, it's going to get expensive and ugly. Sometimes you have to accept a good result even if it's not perfect." I talked it over with Jennifer. She was nervous about rejecting the settlement and continuing the fight, but she was also angry about the vandalism and the way Sharon had poisoned the neighborhood against us. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want Sharon held accountable. Not just for the HOA stuff, but for the damage she's caused. But we can't prove she vandalized anything. Not yet." I called Rick back and told him I wanted to accept the settlement, but with one modification. I wanted the HOA to add security cameras at the bus stop corner, covering the sidewalk area where the ice problems had occurred. Rick thought it was an odd request, but he passed it along. The HOA agreed. 2 weeks later, as part of the settlement implementation, they installed 2 high-quality security cameras with night vision at the corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street. The cameras were positioned to monitor the bus stop for safety purposes, but they also happened to provide excellent coverage of my house and property. The snow removal rule was officially rescinded at the next HOA board meeting. Sharon gave a bitter speech about how she was disappointed in the board for caving to legal threats, but the vote was unanimous. Even she ultimately voted to approve the settlement, probably on advice from the HOA's lawyer. Things were quiet for about 2 weeks. I went back to clearing my snow at 6 a.m. with my snowblower, and the sidewalk stayed ice-free. The school bus returned to its normal stop at the corner. The nasty comments on the neighborhood Facebook group gradually died down, though I noticed I had been quietly removed from the group at some point. Then the vandalism happened again. I was at work when the Rochester Police Department called me. The officer on the line sounded different than the ones who had taken my initial report. "Mr. Kirkland, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Rochester Police Department. I'm calling about the vandalism incident at your home last month. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Yes, of course." "Did you find something?" "We did." "Can you come down to the station today? I'd like to show you something." I left work early and drove to the police station on 4th Street. Detective Morrison was a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led me to a small conference room and pulled up a video on her laptop. "This is from last night," she said. "One of our patrol officers was driving through your neighborhood around 2 a.m. when he saw someone acting suspiciously near your property. He pulled over to investigate and saw this." She played the video. It was dashcam footage from a police cruiser. In the video, I could see a figure in dark clothing approaching my house. The figure was carrying something. When the police car's spotlight hit them, they dropped what they were carrying and ran. The officer chased on foot but lost them in the backyards between houses. "What were they carrying?" I asked. Detective Morrison pulled out an evidence bag. Inside was a can of spray paint, red to match the color used in the first vandalism. "We also found this." She pulled out another evidence bag containing what looked like a receipt. "It fell out of their pocket while they were running. It's a receipt from Home Depot for the purchase of spray paint, purchased 3 hours before the incident." "Did you get a clear look at who it was?" "Not their face." "But watch this part." She advanced the video. "See their shoes? Those are very distinctive, purple and white Nike Air Max sneakers with a custom design." I looked at the shoes in the video. They were unusual, with what looked like a decorative pattern on the sides. "I've seen those shoes," I said slowly. "Sharon Pemberton's daughter was wearing them at the bus stop last week. I remember because they seemed impractical for winter weather." Detective Morrison nodded. "Sharon Pemberton's daughter is Kayla Pemberton, age 19, currently attending Rochester Community and Technical College. We obtained a warrant this morning and searched the Pemberton residence. We found these shoes, along with clothing that matches what's in this video. We also found 2 more cans of the same spray paint in the garage." I felt my heart racing. "So Kayla did the vandalism." "We arrested her this morning. She initially denied involvement, but when we showed her the video evidence and told her we had her shoes, she confessed. She admitted to both the vandalism last month and to attempting to vandalize your property again last night." "Did Sharon know?" Detective Morrison's expression hardened. "That's the interesting part. When we interviewed Kayla, she said her mother had been talking about you constantly. About how you were ruining the neighborhood, driving down property values, making it unsafe for children. According to Kayla, Sharon said someone needed to teach you a lesson. Kayla took that as encouragement. But Sharon didn't directly tell her to do it. Not according to Kayla's statement. But we're still investigating. We've requested Sharon's phone records and social media messages. If we find evidence that she directly encouraged or participated in the vandalism, she could face charges as well." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. "What happens now?" "Kayla has been charged with criminal damage to property and trespassing. Because the damage exceeded $1,000, and this was her second offense, it's a felony. She's being held on $5,000 bail. We're continuing to investigate Sharon's involvement. If you want to pursue a civil case for damages, you have grounds to do so." I left the police station feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that the vandal had been caught. Part of me felt bad that a 19-year-old kid was facing felony charges because her mother had poisoned her mind against me. And part of me was still angry at Sharon for creating this entire situation. The neighborhood response to Kayla's arrest was swift and divided. Some people were shocked and sympathetic to the Pemberton family. Others pointed out that this was the inevitable result of Sharon's toxic leadership. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I was no longer part of but Jennifer still had access to, exploded with arguments. Marcus called me that evening. "Have you heard about Kayla?" "Yeah, the police called me. Sharon's claiming this is all your fault. She's saying you drove her daughter to desperation by suing the HOA and refusing to be a good neighbor." "That's insane." "I know. But she's telling anyone who will listen. She also tried to hold an emergency board meeting to expel you from the HOA. Can she do that?" "No. The lawyer already told her that you can't be expelled from the HOA for exercising your legal rights, but she's not listening to reason anymore." "Aaron, I think she's having some kind of breakdown." 2 days later, Detective Morrison called me again. "We've completed our investigation of Sharon Pemberton," she said. "I wanted to give you an update before this becomes public. We obtained her text messages with her daughter. There are multiple messages where Sharon explicitly encouraged Kayla to do something about you. In one message, Sharon said, 'Someone needs to make him understand he can't treat people this way.' In another, sent the day before the first vandalism, she said, 'Be creative.' That sounds pretty direct." "It is." We also found messages after the first vandalism where Kayla told Sharon what she had done. Sharon's response was, "Good, maybe now he'll learn. We're charging Sharon with conspiracy to commit criminal damage to property and being an accessory after the fact." "Is she under arrest?" "She was arrested about an hour ago. She's being processed now." Sharon's arrest was the neighborhood scandal of the year. The local news picked up the story, running segments about an HOA president arrested for conspiring to vandalize a homeowner's property. The headlines were predictably dramatic. "HOA president faces criminal charges in vandalism scheme," and "Snow removal dispute leads to arrests in Rochester suburb." The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Sharon as president. Tom Reynolds, a retired engineer who had always seemed reasonable, was appointed interim president. He called me the day after Sharon's arrest. "Aaron, I want to apologize on behalf of the entire board," he said. "This situation spiraled completely out of control, and we should have stopped Sharon much earlier. We're going to be reviewing all of our rules and procedures to make sure nothing like this happens again." "I appreciate that, Tom. I also want to let you know that we're going to be dissolving the board and holding new elections. I think we need fresh perspectives, and I hope you'll consider running for a position. We need people who understand that HOA rules should be reasonable and serve the community, not create problems." I thanked him but didn't commit to anything. I needed some time to process everything that had happened. The legal proceedings moved forward over the next several months. Kayla pleaded guilty to felony criminal damage to property as part of a plea deal. Because she was a first-time offender despite the 2 incidents, and because her lawyer successfully argued that she had been manipulated by her mother, she received a sentence of 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution for the damages to my property, which totaled $3,200 after I got repair estimates for the garage door repainting and the tire replacement. Sharon's case was more complex. Her lawyer tried to argue that her text messages were taken out of context and that she never explicitly told Kayla to commit vandalism. But the prosecution had a strong case, especially after Kayla testified that she understood her mother's messages as encouragement to take action against me. The trial lasted 3 days. I attended every session, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Jennifer. Sharon looked smaller somehow, diminished from the assertive HOA president who had marched across the street to yell at me about my snowblower. Her husband Greg sat beside her, still silent, still nodding, but looking tired and defeated. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge sentenced Sharon to 1 year in county jail, with eligibility for work release after 6 months, 3 years probation, and restitution payments to me for my legal fees related to the vandalism investigation. As the bailiff led Sharon away, she turned and looked at me. I expected anger or hatred, but instead I saw something like bewilderment, as if she couldn't understand how her righteous crusade to maintain neighborhood standards had ended with her in handcuffs. The civil litigation was almost anticlimactic after the criminal proceedings. My lawyer filed a lawsuit against both Sharon and Kayla for the full damages, including property repair, legal fees, emotional distress, and lost wages from time spent dealing with the situation. Their lawyer quickly agreed to a settlement of $45,000 to be paid over 5 years. The money would come primarily from Sharon and Greg's assets. Kayla was judgment-proof as a college student with no income. The HOA held new elections in April. True to Tom Reynolds' suggestion, I ran for a board position. So did Marcus, Patricia Donovan, and 2 other neighbors who had been vocal about wanting more reasonable leadership. We all won our races easily. Sharon's former allies on the board either chose not to run or lost badly. At our first official board meeting, we voted unanimously to revise the HOA rules. We eliminated the snow removal time restrictions permanently. We also added language requiring board approval for any new rules that would restrict normal homeowner maintenance activities. And we implemented a new policy requiring the board to consult with a lawyer before assessing any fines over $100 or taking any action on private property. I think we've learned our lesson about power-hungry board presidents, Tom said at the meeting. This HOA exists to maintain common areas and protect property values, not to micromanage people's lives. Everyone agreed. Life slowly returned to normal in Meadowbrook Heights. The neighborhood Facebook group was disbanded and replaced with a new one with stricter moderation rules prohibiting personal attacks. The bus stop at the corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street operated without incident through the rest of winter and into spring. People still gossiped about the Sharon situation occasionally, but as the months passed, it became just another story, another example of what happens when HOA boards go wrong. Jennifer and I talked about moving a few times, but we ultimately decided to stay. We had won the fight, such as it was, and the neighborhood was genuinely better now. The new board was responsive and reasonable. Rules were enforced fairly. People could clear their snow whenever they needed to. One morning in late May, I was mowing my lawn when Greg Pemberton walked past. Sharon had been released from jail after serving 6 months with work release, and they were putting their house up for sale. I hadn't spoken to Greg since before the arrest. He stopped at the edge of my driveway. "Aaron, can I talk to you for a minute?" I killed the mower engine. "Sure." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I wanted to apologize for everything. For Sharon, for Kayla, for the whole mess. I should have done more to stop it. I could see she was getting obsessed with the HOA stuff, but I just kept my head down and hoped it would blow over. "Greg, I don't blame you. You're not responsible for their choices." "Maybe not. but I enabled it by not speaking up. Anyway, I wanted you to know I'm sorry, and I wanted to thank you, actually. Thank me for not settling, for seeing it through. Sharon needed to face consequences, and she never would have if you had just given up and moved away. She's getting help now. Therapy. Medication. She's dealing with some things she should have dealt with a long time ago. It cost us a lot, but maybe it was necessary. I nodded, not sure what to say. Greg gave me a sad smile and walked away. The Pemberton house sold in June to a young couple with a newborn baby. They seemed nice and normal. At the neighborhood welcome cookout, they laughed when someone joked about the HOA, not knowing the full story of what had happened just months before. Marcus pulled me aside at the cookout. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, it still feels surreal sometimes. A year ago I was just a guy trying to shovel his driveway. And now you're the guy who took down a corrupt HOA president and reformed the entire board. I don't know if Sharon was corrupt exactly. Power-hungry, maybe. Delusional about her authority." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I looked into her history after everything happened. Did you know she was fired from her last job before she became a stay-at-home mom? She was an office manager at a law firm, and apparently she was constantly fighting with the partners about policies and procedures. She wanted everything done her way. They finally let her go because she was creating a toxic environment. So the HOA thing was a pattern. Seems like it. She found a position where she had some real authority and no boss to overrule her, and she went overboard with it. Classic case of someone who needs to control their environment to feel secure." I thought about that as I watched the new neighbors chatting with other residents, oblivious to the drama that had consumed this subdivision just months ago. How many HOAs across America had their own Sharon Pembertons? People who treated volunteer board positions like corporate executive roles and made everyone's lives miserable in the process. The final chapter of the saga came in August, when I received a letter from Sharon. It was forwarded through my lawyer, probably because she wasn't allowed to contact me directly as part of her probation terms. The letter was handwritten on plain white paper. "Dear Aaron," it began, "I know you have no reason to listen to anything I say, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong. I let my need to control things spiral out of control. I convinced myself that I was protecting the neighborhood, when really I was just feeding my own ego. I involved my daughter in my vendetta against you and destroyed her future in the process. I lost my family's savings, my reputation, and my freedom. But worst of all, I became the kind of person I always despised, a bully who used rules as weapons. I'm writing this not to ask for forgiveness, but to say that you were right to stand up to me. Someone needed to. I hope you're doing well, and I hope the neighborhood is better now that I'm gone. Sharon." I showed the letter to Jennifer. She read it twice, then handed it back to me. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know. File it away, I guess. It doesn't change anything, but it's something." "Do you forgive her?" I thought about that question for a long time. Did I forgive Sharon for the stress, the legal battles, the vandalism, the way she turned neighbors against each other? Part of me did. She was clearly dealing with her own issues, and she had paid a heavy price for her actions. But another part of me would never forget waking up to find my garage door vandalized, or the feeling of being persecuted in my own neighborhood, or the realization that someone hated me enough to encourage their daughter to commit crimes against me. "I think forgiveness might be too strong a word," I finally said. "But I don't hate her. I just feel sad about the whole situation. Sad that it came to this. Sad that someone so obsessed with maintaining neighborhood standards ended up destroying several lives, including her own." Jennifer squeezed my hand. "That's very mature of you. Or maybe I'm just tired of being angry." As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, the snow returned to Rochester. The first significant snowfall came in early November, 6 inches of heavy wet snow that fell overnight. I woke at 6 a.m., like I always did, and fired up my snowblower. The familiar roar of the engine echoed through the pre-dawn darkness as I cleared my driveway and sidewalks. Nobody complained. Nobody sent me letters or violation notices. The HOA board, which now included me, had better things to worry about than what time residents cleared their snow. The school bus stopped safely at the corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street every morning, and the kids walked on clear, ice-free sidewalks to board it. Sometimes I would see the new neighbors clearing their snow early in the morning, and I would wave as I passed by with my snowblower. They would wave back, probably thinking I was just another normal neighbor in another normal subdivision, and in a way I was. The drama had passed. The lessons had been learned. The HOA had been reformed. Life had returned to the peaceful, boring normalcy that suburbs are supposed to provide. But every time I used my snowblower before 8 a.m., I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Not because I was violating rules or getting away with something, but because the rules were reasonable now. Because the HOA served its residents instead of controlling them. Because sometimes, when you stand up to petty tyrants, you actually win. The corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street never had ice problems again. The sidewalks were always clear. The bus always stopped safely. And if the early morning sound of my snowblower occasionally woke someone up, nobody complained, because in the end, that's what good neighbors do. They understand that minor inconveniences are part of living in a community. They don't weaponize rules to punish people who irritate them. They don't encourage their children to commit crimes against people they disagree with. They just live their lives, maintain their properties, and treat each other with basic respect and common sense. It shouldn't be a revolutionary concept. But after everything I went through with Sharon and the HOA, it felt like a hard-won victory. On a cold morning in January, exactly 1 year after Sharon had first confronted me about my snowblower, I was outside clearing snow when Tom Reynolds walked past on his morning jog. He stopped and pulled out his earbuds. "Morning, Aaron. Getting an early start." "Best time to clear snow is when it's fresh," I said. "Easier to move, doesn't turn into ice. Makes sense. Hey, I wanted to thank you again for joining the board. We've had a really good year. No drama, no lawsuits, just boring, normal HOA stuff. Boring normal is exactly what an HOA should be." Tom laughed. "Amen to that. See you at the meeting Thursday. I'll be there." He jogged off into the darkness, and I went back to clearing snow. The snowblower roared. The snow flew in white arcs through the beam of my work light, and somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were probably waking up to get ready for school. The bus would arrive at 7:45, right on schedule. It would stop at the corner of Maple Drive and Oak Street, where the sidewalk would be clear and safe, and life in Meadowbrook Heights would continue, peaceful and drama-free, exactly as it should be. I finished the last section of sidewalk and shut off the snowblower. The sudden silence was almost startling. I stood there for a moment in the pre-dawn cold, my breath fogging in the frigid air, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coffee later. Want to discuss the spring landscaping budget for the common areas." "Boring HOA stuff," I texted back with a smile emoji. "Perfect." As I pushed the snowblower back into the garage, I took one last look at my cleared driveway and sidewalks. They weren't perfect. There were a few spots I had missed that I would touch up later. But they were safe. They were functional. And most importantly, I had cleared them on my own schedule, following reasonable rules that made sense for the community. That's all I ever wanted. Not to fight with the HOA. Not to become some kind of neighborhood rebel. Just to maintain my property in a reasonable way without someone breathing down my neck about arbitrary rules designed to make one person feel important. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, that deep blue that comes just before sunrise. Another day was beginning in Meadowbrook Heights. Another normal, peaceful, boring day in suburbia. And after everything I had been through, that sounded absolutely perfect.